Mike Mentzer is one of the most debated figures in bodybuilding history. His training philosophy, heavy duty, challenged the high-volume orthodoxy of the 1970s, and, decades later, people still argue about whether he practiced what he preached. Critics say Mike didn't train the way he told others to. He built his physique with high-volume training and then sold low-volume programs later. But when you dig into the actual numbers, the picture looks very different and much more interesting. The real story isn't about whether Mike was lying or changing his tune. It's about something most people never consider: the massive difference in recovery ability between a steroid-enhanced athlete and a natural trainee. When you understand that difference, suddenly Mike's transition from his competition routine in the late 1970s to his ideal routine in the mid-1990s makes perfect sense. Context matters. What Mike actually did versus conventional 1970s volume. In the 1970s, the magazine orthodoxy of bodybuilding was simple: train as much as possible. 6 days a week in the gym was the norm, with many pros doing double sessions. Per muscle volume often hovered around 20 sets per workout, and most muscles were hit twice a week. It was a program sustainable only for the genetically gifted and the chemically enhanced. Mike Mentzer, even at his competitive peak in the late 1970s, was already operating on a different wavelength. His split typically meant 3 to 4 training days a week, averaging about 3.5. Direct work per muscle group ranged from just 2 to 4 sets for arms, 2 to 3 sets for calves, and roughly 6 to 7 sets for larger groups like legs, lats, and delts. And, like everyone else, he generally trained each muscle twice a week, but with far less time and volume in each session. Mike made this crystal clear in a 1980 audio seminar.
Keep your sets low. Never do more than 5 sets per body part. As you continue to progress, I suppose it's somewhat natural to want to add more and more to your workout because your enthusiasm is growing and your energy is burgeoning. However, perhaps the most important exercise you can perform is the exercise of restraint. Restraining that tendency to always want to do more. Remember, your body has to recover, and when you do too many high-intensity sets, you're not going to give your body enough time to recover between workouts. Never train more than 4 days a week, and in some cases, even 4 days out of every 7 days is too much training. What should guide you is how much progress you're making. If you don't realize immediate progress from heavy-duty training, then you're probably not giving yourself sufficient time to recover. The intensity of effort involved with heavy-duty training is more than sufficient to induce growth stimulation. So if in fact you aren't realizing such progress, then you're not giving yourself enough time to recover between workouts and grow as well. Maybe training 4 days out of every 9 or 10 days would be better. Again, these things aren't preordained. They're not scratched in stone. No one ever said you had to set up your training routine according to a rigid 7-day-a-week schedule. Maybe 4 days out of every 10 days would be best. If the intensity is sufficient, then the only other factor that can be blamed for your not realizing more progress is not sufficient time to recover between workouts.
When you run the numbers, the gap is stark. Compared to the typical 6-day schedule, Mike's 3.5-day average meant 42% fewer training days. And instead of hammering each muscle with 20 sets per session, his 4-set average represented an 80% drop in workload. Put together, that's roughly a 60% reduction in total training load compared to his peers, and yet he got better results in barely 2/5 of the time. So when critics claim Mentzer secretly trained high volume, they're projecting the era's mainstream model onto him. He didn't. Even as a steroid-assisted pro, he practiced a lower-set, higher-intensity approach than almost anyone around him. As he put it in a telephone interview,
I would just suggest that no matter what methods you use, you don't do more than 6 sets of body part. Use very good form, strict form, train to failure, use force reps occasionally, and don't overtrain. It's the formula that Arthur Jones advocated was train intensely, briefly, and infrequently. That is, not too frequently, so that you don't
The shift, why his 1990s advice looked so different. By the early 1990s, Mike wasn't competing, he was coaching. And the people he worked with weren't pro bodybuilders on steroids. They were regular, natural trainees, with average genetics, 9-to-5 jobs, and real-world stress. In 1993, his updated heavy-duty program dropped to about 1 set per exercise. By 1996, with the ideal routine, he cut things down even more. Here's what that meant. 1 workout every 4 days, rotating body parts so each muscle was trained once every 8 days. 2 to 3 direct sets per muscle per session, 1 set per exercise. A move away from forced reps and heavy negatives, because those extreme intensity techniques require more recovery time. Mike himself would later reflect on his own competition-era training and admit,
despite having been the arch advocate of lesser training, I still was overtraining. I understood the general theory of high intensity quite clearly, namely that to be productive, training has to be intense, brief, and infrequent. But again, if I had made one major training mistake, I wasn't training briefly and infrequently enough. I was ignorant of a few things. The main thing I was ignorant about was I didn't realize just how brief and infrequent high-intensity training had to be. I didn't understand precisely how demanding it was on the body.
From the outside, it looked like Mike had gone ultra-minimalist, but in reality, he was simply matching the training stress to the recovery capacity of his clients. And when you understand the difference between steroid-assisted recovery and natural recovery, it stops looking radical and starts looking like common sense. The recovery matrix, quantifying the cost per unit of work. To really see the difference between Mike's competition-era training and his 1990s ideal routine, you have to think about something I call the recovery cost per set. Here's the idea. Imagine you train a muscle, then count how many days you wait before training it again. Now divide that rest time by the number of sets you did for that muscle. That tells you how much recovery time you need for each set you perform. In the late 70s, Mike usually trained each muscle twice a week, so about every 3.5 days. For a big muscle group, he might do 6 or 7 direct sets on a workout. That works out to about half a day of recovery per set, roughly 12 hours before his body was ready for another set for that muscle. By 1996, working with natural clients, things had changed. Most muscles were trained only once every 8 days, and only 2 or 3 sets were done for that muscle each time. Now each set required over 3 full days of recovery. So, when you compare the two, the recovery cost per set for a natural trainee is roughly 6 times higher than for someone enhanced. That's not a small tweak, that's a completely different recovery reality. Why even Mike's low-volume competition plan was too much for naturals. Now this is where the picture really comes into focus. Even though Mike's 1970s training was considered low volume compared to the other pros, it's still far more than what the average natural trainee can realistically recover from. Back then, a big muscle group like legs might get 6 or 7 sets on a workout twice a week, 12 to 14 direct sets per week. Smaller muscles like arms might get 2 to 4 sets per session twice a week for 4 to 8 total sets. Compare that to the 1996 ideal routine for naturals, 2 or 3 sets per workout, once every 8 days. That's just over 2 sets per week for a big muscle group. We've gone from 12 sets a week down to 2. That's about 1/5 of the workload, and spaced much further apart. The reason is simple. Give a natural trainee even Mike's low competition era workload, and they'll be training a muscle again before it's fully recovered. Over time, that's a straight line to burnout, not progress. The physiology, why the gap is so big. So why is this recovery gap so massive? A landmark 1996 New England Journal of Medicine study gives us the answer. Researchers split men into 4 groups. One group did nothing. One group trained naturally. One group took high-dose testosterone but didn't train. And one group both trained and took testosterone. The natural training group gained about 1.9 kilos of lean muscle in 10 weeks. The testosterone-only group, without lifting a single weight, gained more than that, 3.2 kilos. And the group that combined training with testosterone, they gained 6.1 kilos, triple the muscle of the natural lifters. Steroids don't just make you grow faster, they supercharge recovery. Your body repairs muscle much quicker so you can train more often and with more volume without overtraining. As Mike said,
the reason some bodybuilders have gained muscle with volume training relates to the fact that steroids act primarily as recovery ability enhancers. Were those same bodybuilders to train for 2 hours a day, 6 days a week without steroids, they would begin to lose muscle mass almost immediately.
For naturals, that supercharged recovery isn't there. The repair process is slower. Train on an enhanced schedule and you're simply hitting muscles that aren't fully healed yet. You're layering stress on top of stress. That's why by the mid-1990s, Mike had most of his natural clients wait a full 8 days before training the same muscle again. It wasn't laziness, it wasn't dogma, it was biology. The takeaway. So, when people look at Mike Mentzer's late 1970s routine and his mid-1990s ideal routine and think these are completely different philosophies, they're missing the point. It's not about changing philosophies, it's about changing context. The man in 1977 was an elite steroid-assisted competitor. The clients in 1996 were everyday natural trainees. Different biology means different recovery, and different recovery means different training prescriptions. According to Mike,
I'd like to warn the neophyte bodybuilder that those outlandish routines you read about in certain muscle magazines, which advocate that you train like the top champs for hours every day, were developed with the explicit understanding that steroid use increases recovery ability or exercise stress tolerance manyfold, yet continue to be promulgated by unscrupulous publishers who refuse to inform their readers, the majority of whom are natural, non-steroid bodybuilders, that the top champs who employ them are drug users.
Here's where Mike's philosophy, stripped of the hype, comes into focus. Training is not growth. Training is the signal for growth. The building happens in the recovery period. As Mike put it,
high-intensity training does not produce growth. It only stimulates the production of growth. It's a trigger that sets the growth process into motion. The actual production of growth takes place during the rest period. It stands to reason then that if one is doing any more sets or any more workouts in a given unit of time than are minimally required to stimulate an increase, to whatever extent he's doing that, he will hamper and possibly prevent the production of growth.
That's why his late career programs look so different from his competition days. He wasn't shrinking from hard work. He was removing everything that got in the way of progress. The real lesson here? If you're natural, you can't just copy the training schedules of enhanced pros, not even the ones who are already considered low volume for their time. Your recovery cost per set is simply too high. In fact, if you try, you'll likely end up stalling or regressing. Instead, follow Mike's evolved wisdom. Hit it hard, hit it briefly, then rest long enough for the work to pay off. One of the things that set Mike Mentzer apart from every other professional bodybuilder was that he spent his career measuring exactly how much training the body could handle before overtraining set in. First for himself as a steroid-enhanced pro in the 1970s, and later for natural clients with far narrower margins. Whatever he discovered, he shared, even when the industry didn't want him to. No hype, no hidden agenda, just the truth about what really works.